I wanted to end on a positive note. So we've talked about a little bit of a review of, how we sort of started the class and the concepts. Hopefully you've seen those play out over the semester. We talked about some of the challenges since early 2025, but I think it's important to talk about the successes, right? And so we've talked about how, and you guys have looked into this, some of you yourselves with your projects, how we are responding or how we responded to particular individual disasters. But I wanted to talk about the fact that we do respond. We do learn from mistakes. We do change how we behave. Sometimes that's at the local level. Sometimes that's at the state level. Sometimes that's at the federal level. But it is the case that we have made modifications to things. Right. Okay, so in general, I want to talk about, post-2005 to the start of the current era that we're in. Why did I pick 2005? Right. So Katrina. Katrina is a watershed event, not just literally because of the rain, but because it truly was so impactful and so traumatic as a nation to go through that we changed a bunch of our policies and procedures. So it seems to make the most sense to talk about the Katrina to the end of the Biden administration as a 2-decade period that we can look at what we did. So again, 3 major dimensions I would say that we have addressed in different shapes and forms over this couple decade. There's the preparedness, the getting ready for stuff. There's the response to actually doing getting people help immediately in the immediate wake of the event, and then how we recover in the wake of that immediate trauma. As we've said before, this is mostly driven by major problems, by major crises, right? The major crises both get people upset and angry. And why did this happen? This makes people that have lost something and want to have at least some meaning from the tragedy demand an improvement, so that at least if my son passed away, if I lost my business or whatever, at least let's make sure that were a similar thing to happen again, other people wouldn't lose their businesses or their families or whatever. And so in particular, things like Katrina and these hurricanes and COVID have led us to do some different types of approaches. And again, those reforms and overhauls have had taken place at all different levels. So let's talk about preparedness first. Or let me ask you guys, so before I even start to go through my list, you guys tell me, what are some of the things maybe we've been reading about, or maybe you explored in some of your research this summer, or some of the news stories you were reading about, or whatever. And any big ones pop up in your guys' heads? Okay, good. So what Taylor's talking about is that particular one is no vegetation, I think within 5 feet, I think is what it is of the wall of the house. Which is a little challenging because some of us, like me, might have trees next to the house that we planted specifically to grow fruit on the side of the house. But we'll see how we deal with that. But the general idea is that we want most vegetation not in the immediate, within a person's body length of the house. Cool, good, okay. And you guys have anything else? Is that your guys' thing?
That's our thing.
Okay, how about you guys?
We have Proposition 1D from 2006, and it provides funding for seismic retrofitting of public schools.
Okay, good. Public school retrofit. Okay, good. Or public schools earthquake retrofit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And that essentially provided, that was it was a bond, right? So that basically provided a source of money that schools could apply to do the overhaul. I know some schools are wealthy and that's not much of an issue. Many other school districts do not have abundant resources, and for something they maybe have money to pay for the teachers, maybe have money to pay for the janitors, but these like unusual big asks, and we're talking probably tens of millions of dollars, if not more, for different schools, or certainly more for school districts. It's like I don't have that budget, right? So this was sort of a one-time boost or a brief boost in the funding so that they could put in the resilient structures. Cool. Okay. Is that anything else? Is that it?
I have an assembly bill.
California?
Yeah, it's for California. It was in 2013, and it's just requiring trustees of public lands like ports or marinas to assess and plan for sea level rise impacts. It doesn't say like a specific amount of feet, but
Okay, to plan sea level rise specifically, right?
yeah.
Okay. Cool. And that one is also, I believe that was what, you said 2013? So that was probably also the 1 meter, right? 1 meter plan?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't say a specific one, but
Okay, cool. Anything else you guys had? Okay. What do you guys have?
we found something about the Davis-Sterling effect, which is related to how often and when you can water your lawns.
Okay, good. So I'm sorry, say it again. Data Sterling?
Davis-Sterling.
Oh, Davis Sterling. Okay, cool. And it's a California law?
Yeah, it's just in California.
And what year was it? Do you know?
I don't know. I can double check.
Okay, double check because I'll add it to my notes. And that one basically says that, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, if we're in a drought condition, if we're in a state or a locally declared drought, that it's legal to restrict watering of lawns, right? That's what it said, basically? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Tell me the year. Do you guys have anything else?
It looks like 2012.
2012. Okay. Cool. Perfect. Thank you. Cool.
It's not really like an official law, it's like something that's like voluntary,
Mhm.
like, the flex alerts, during like the heat waves in California to reduce like power.
Okay. I think that's is that from the ISO, from the individual system operator?
Independent system of.
Independent, okay, yeah. Okay, cool. Does it have a year on that when they first started?
It's really fine, but I think it started like in 2000.
Okay, cool. All right, cool, good. Did I get anything? Does anybody else have any other thoughts or examples? Good, so those are all examples. So some of those are guidances, some of those are requirements, right? So there's a bit of a mix here. But those are, so just as a quick review, we have the Post-Katrina federal bill, and we'll talk about that in a second. We have California Senate Bill 272, which required us, and we also talked about, the California Assembly Bill in 2013 in that case, ports and marinas and harbors. And I know we talk a lot about in our county, we're worried about sensitive environments, wetlands and the like. We're worried about the energy infrastructure. We're worried about people's houses. Those are all total valid concerns. We're worried about the toxic dump site that's Halico getting inundated. But consistently across the state of California, the largest financial impacts are predicted to be in ports and harbors. So all these other things matter too, but like LA Long Beach, Oakland, those areas with sea level rise, because so much of our economy runs through there, very high, very easy to calculate, very high economic numbers. Calculating the economic cost of the wetland getting inundated, that's a little bit harder. But the ports and harbors always show up as big hotspots of sea level rise. And so that's one of the reasons why that particular group was targeted with that one. And then Taylor was telling us about this executive order about home hardening. So we have more and more policies as we are becoming a more and more fire prone state and fire prone region to take more aggressive pre-disturbance, pre-impact management efforts. And so this is one of those. So we mentioned that 5-foot one. Another one that's coming up, thank God, it's been so many years since I've been telling people, is oak trees. So people have finally gotten religion on oak trees. And so people are like, plant more oak trees. Why? Because oak trees are now viewed, because suddenly some people did some studies, right? You could have just told them because it's native vegetation. But anyway, but the idea is oak trees, mature oak trees, act like ember catchers. So one of the big problems we have, as you guys know from our fire the impacts to our local communities are mostly driven by Santa Ana wind event fires. And so that means we have a large ember cast. We have the embers blowing very far away. And a big oak tree is a really good catcher of those embers. The tree will burn, but oftentimes if it's well hydrated, that tree will recover, right? So it's not going to die, but it's going to catch the embers. Versus if we didn't have oak trees or we had some non-native like eucalyptus or whatever, those guys sort of burn and just burn. So some of the newest insights we have and guidance, this is not quite into law yet, but we're moving towards this, is to have this vegetation clearance around immediate structures of, like Taylor was saying, zone 0, meaning the part that touches the structure, 5 feet, and also those guys. What else do we have here? Public school retrofitting, it's good. So money for earthquake prep. And we talked about this in our context when we talked about earthquakes. The original thing was, hey, save people, design the buildings so that they're survivable. And then we did that. And the next iteration was, let's design buildings so that they survive. So that when we're done with the earthquake, we maybe got to replace a window or two, but the whole building is safe. We don't need to spend billions of dollars putting in a new building. And so that is how most private buildings have gone, but a lot of our public infrastructure lags behind. So that's why there was the need for that thing, that the proposition that we talked about there. And then, so again, sea level rise planning and the flex alerts. So the flex alerts are an effort to try to avoid power failures, right? And so you guys may or may not follow the flex alerts, but a lot of large institutions like the Amazon warehouses and the county government building and stuff like that will follow the guidance of them. Cool. All right, good. So thanks for those. Those are good thoughts. Let's talk about some of the ones I pulled together. Okay, so things that we've gotten better since 2005, I would say, include better getting ready beforehand for the disasters. So for example, our hurricane track predictions have gotten much better, much better in the last 20 years. So some of the estimates are as much as up to 75% more accurate. Again, we showed this when we went into that lecture, but basically we have the so-called spaghetti models, which is we run model 1 and model 2 and model 3 and model 4, or model 1 with this assumption and model 1 with that assumption. And we get a big series of models, and then we take all of these models together and we try to do the best fit, and the models are generally doing much better at predicting the actual path of the hurricane. We're actively cutting the funding to that research now. So Merry Christmas. So we've made a lot of predictions. It's unlikely we're going to make a lot of dramatic improvements in the next few years, but hopefully we'll soon be able to return to that era when we are further improving the accuracy of our models. We've increased money for mitigation from the Disaster Recovery Act that particularly helped provide funding for general infrastructure to different communities around the country. That's a federal law. We have more community readiness through things like, and some of you guys talked about, I think I can't remember who talked about this, but one of you guys mentioned the idea of sort of notices on our phones and stuff. And so we're getting more of these wireless emergency alerts. And indeed, in some areas, we have requirements for the standardization of how those alerts go. You might have remembered a few years ago, our phones all got, and this happened I think twice, got like a test message, a test warning message that you couldn't turn off. It was part of the emergency alert system, and it just sort of said, "Rah, rah, test of our national warning system," kind of thing. So those types of improvements are definitely happening, and we've moved into more of what you might call what some people call a whole community planning. So taking everybody into effect. We've mentioned this briefly, but we don't just plan for the homes. We plan for the homeless guys that are in the riverbed and the farmers out there and kind of all that stuff. And a lot of these things fall under this approach of more broader warnings, et cetera. We really, in the wake of Katrina especially, did several different response reforms that some people have referred to as go big and go early. So don't wait around. So as soon as we have a problem, get in there really quickly, bring a lot of resources really fast. Yeah, I'll just say that. So that's an improvement. And one of the first big tests of this was with Hurricane Harvey. Well, there were others, but a clear sign of success, I'll say it that way, happened with Hurricane Harvey in Texas. And it went through Texas, but in particular, it whacked Houston. And when Houston got whacked. And so in the immediate wake of that, the federal resources brought in on the order of 3 million meals, 3 million liters of water, and nothing is perfect, but a vast improvement over what happened, for example, in New Orleans about a decade or so before. We also have unified command. So now this technically started before my 2005 window. So the unified command in the ICS, which is the incident command structure, that grew out of 9/11. But as we saw with Katrina, it didn't really get a hardcore test in terms of natural disasters, really, until Katrina. And so we made some continued reforms of that, and also worked on making sure it sort of interoperability and everybody can talk to each other. So a lot more drilling, a lot more practicing, a lot more virtual disasters that we run through so people see who to talk to and who their counterpart they need to talk to is. And so that uniform command structure and incident command structure is really improved dramatically over the last 20 years. And it's really helped streamline response. That's a good thing. And then after the thing happens, after the disaster happens, and then we work on recovery, we have in 2011, we have the National Disaster Recovery Framework. That's a program within FEMA that specifically tries to support more of the recovery functions and be consistent about our support for recovery functions. These next ones speak to block grants. And so these block grants are ways, so what is a block? Anybody know what a block grant is? Anybody heard that in other classes? Okay, so if I want to do my Pacific Palisades research, I would write to the National Science Foundation or whoever and say, hey, I want to do my thing. And if they'd have some kind of competitive process, I'd have to write an application, put a budget in. They would say, okay, yes, we like it. It's a good project. Here's money. They would give me money, and I would get the money from the federal agency or the state agency or whoever, right? Or the nonprofit or whatever. A block grant is different. A block grant is regional. So it's either statewide or countywide or whatever wide, and someone is picked. So the idea is, rather than the folks at the National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, whatever the big agency is, they're not going to evaluate the projects. Instead, they're going to go, you know what, we're going to give, I don't know, Ventura County $20 million to do wildfire preparedness or sewage recovery after, wildfire, whatever it is. There's going to be some theme. And so we'll pick someone. It's usually a nonprofit. Sometimes it's a local county agency or something like that. And so if Marisol's the one, she or her group will apply for the 20 million, but she's not going to use the 20 million. So she's going to apply to be the queen of the money. And so the organization would give that money to the local, or the national or the larger organization would give it to the local one, and then they would be in charge of doing it. And they usually have a lot lower barriers to getting the money. So think of funding for farmers. A farmer's not going to apply to the National Science Foundation. A farmer's not going to apply to, or many of them don't have time or the skills or the grant writing skills or whatever. So oftentimes with the block grant people is they also have people in their office that help you apply for the money. So in other words, it's much reduced barriers to getting the money out. And so it's a lot more sort of on the ground projects where the people that are applying don't have to go through the larger bureaucracy. That's a so-called block grant. Okay. So the name comes from, instead of giving 100 grants, instead of Washington, D.C. giving 100 grants to Ventura County, they give one to Ventura County, and then Ventura County disperses them to the 100 projects, that kind of thing. Yeah? Okay. Okay. And then post-Hurricane Maria, really highlighted some stuff. We saw this with Katrina, but it really highlighted this idea of people that don't have proper documentation, right? Can't prove that they're a citizen, can't prove they own the property, can't prove whatever. It's a barrier, right? And because everybody's worried about fraud, no, I'm not going to give you any money unless you have your legal document. Oftentimes those documents have been lost, and so we've made some progress dealing with those types of issues. And then next I'm just going to go through a couple specific reforms for some of the specific disasters we've talked about or highlighted. So one is the specific reforms in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, of 2005's Hurricane Katrina. Oh, post-Katrina. Well, that's weird. That's bad. I got to fix that slide. So the Post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act. Wait, did you guys say that one? Did you guys say that one? Is that the one you guys said? Yes. Okay, there you go. See? So as we were discussing before, so this one helped us restructure FEMA and restructure it to more of the way it was, I would suggest, before some of the cuts had been made. And it really restored this role of FEMA being able to help before the disaster strikes. So there's been a political football about, no, this is just after the thing happens. And this allowed FEMA to support more planning and preparation efforts across the country. The Army Corps built $14.5 billion worth of so-called flood protection system for the city of New Orleans. It's not great. I'll just say that. If you guys want to come with me to New Orleans next spring, I can show you why. But it definitely is an improvement. It's an improvement from having the dozens and dozens of holes in the levees that we had right after. But with respect, it still leaves a lot to be desired. And so, yeah. So anyway, so that's where we are with that. And then we definitely have worked on, since Katrina, problems with communication. So a lot of the people, so when Katrina struck, I don't know if I talked about this in my Katrina lecture, when Katrina struck, they were in effect calling like us. They were calling our friends at the Louisiana State University Hurricane Center, which, by the way, the state then destroyed and defunded and said, we don't need a hurricane center in Louisiana. Why would we need a hurricane center? But that's another story. So what was happening is some people were calling in and they're like, oh my God, I'm trapped in my house. Floodwaters are rising. I was inside my house. I went up to the attic, but now I can't get out of the attic. Can you please send someone, right? And because the streets were all flooded and you couldn't really easily see the streets and stuff, the 911 operators forwarded the information to the folks at Louisiana State University who had good GIS skills, and they translated the addresses to lat and lon, and then they called back to the dispatch and said, this person is calling from latitude X, longitude Y, and that's how many of the Coast Guard responding helicopters found folks. So we've gotten better with that. And that capacity has moved more inside of most 911 call centers stuff. We definitely surged staffing in the wake of Katrina to a lot of these groups. And one of the big things, as you saw in that video I played for you in our class, a lot of those folks didn't evacuate because they were worried about their animals. We've seen the same problem in California where people don't want to go to the Red Cross shelter because they don't allow pets. And if you guys are dedicated to your dog, are you going to just let your dog go? You're probably not, right? And so there are real concerns about bringing a big old Rottweiler or whatever into an emergency shelter or whatever. But we now acknowledge we need to deal with that, and we need to have plans for people that do have animals, how they can still get shelter, but be integrated. So that was in the wake of Katrina. Post Deepwater Horizon, the big oil spill, the largest marine oil spill in U.S. history, not the largest oil spill. The largest oil spill, you guys remember from that lecture? Where's the largest oil spill in the U.S. history? That's the Deepwater Horizon. That's the largest marine oil spill. No. Santa Barbara was about 2% of what spilled during the Deepwater Horizon. Lakeview Gusher, the Lakeview Gusher, which is in Kern County, 100 years before Deepwater Horizon. That was the largest we had. But Deepwater Horizon is the largest marine oil spill, the largest one in the ocean that we had. And so major thing that happened there was, this is ironic because this used to be unique because people said before this, a president can't dissolve a federal agency. Now they do because they don't need to follow the law. But what was previously considered unique about the Deepwater Horizon is the Minerals Management Service was not created by an act of Congress. The Minerals Management Service is the entity that regulates oil and gas drilling in the ocean and wind leases and all that kind of stuff. And so they were created by executive order. They were created by executive administrations. And so what that meant was when the Deepwater Horizon happened, the feds could very quickly change it, and we did. And we have two of these offices right here in Camarillo. We have the West Coast headquarters right here, right near campus. And so we broke into Bessie and Bohm. And so at the time, Minerals Management Service both did the leasing, so the promotion of the energy industry, and the safety oversight. And people said, that's kind of like the fox watching the hen house, right, or whatever. And so we formally split those roles up, and we created two daughter agencies as opposed to one major agency. I used to have quizzes like, why could this be done? And it was because of that. Now apparently if we want to destroy stuff that Congress created or Constitution created, we just change it apparently because we don't follow the law. But anyway, we also changed some stuff with regards to well safety, especially deep well safety and things about so-called emergency cutoff valves and stuff. Some of the response technology got a little bit better. I would argue did not get a lot better, but it got a little bit better. And this was really a test of in the incident command system. It's run by and I should have said this before, but the incident command system varies depending on what the incident is or the disaster is. And so if it touches the ocean, it's usually the Coast Guard that's the entity in charge. And this was the first really big test where it was a private player. So technically what happens when the oil spill happens is there's what we call the responsible party, and it's their responsibility to do all the work. So the oil company that spills the oil, they have to cap the oil. They have to clean up the oil. They have to check for the impacts. But what happens essentially is the feds sort of stand there and look over their shoulder. And if they're not doing it the way the feds agree with, then the feds take over. But the idea is the person that did the polluting, the person that's in charge of the thing that's causing the problem, they have to clean up their own mess is the idea. And so this was the first real big test of integrating such a large private entity into an extended unified command and incident command system. And then before any of this, so most of the stuff is mandated through or is dealt with through lawsuits, and somebody sued, the feds sue, and then the company says, no, we didn't do it, and it goes back and forth for years and years and years. What BP did was they gave a relatively small dollop of money. I know $20 billion doesn't sound small, but this was not anywhere close to probably the total impact, but that's my professional opinion. But in any event, they came out with this. They came out with a first chunk of funding early, and then a larger chunk of stuff later. and this was mediated through the so-called natural resources damage assessment model, which came out before 2005, but it was anyway, that happened in the wake of Deepwater Horizon. Hurricane Harvey, that hurricane that struck Texas, that did a lot of flooding, really was, the problem with Houston is it's a pancake. Has anybody been to Houston? Is a flat. And by flat, I mean flat. And so very low lying. And so very little topographic variation can be significant. And essentially, a lot of the urbanization and the sprawl that happened in recent decades was into the just slightly lower areas, just slightly, more a couple feet lower, kind of drainage channel or depression, and that made a huge difference. And so in the wake of this, there was a huge investment in hydrological management of the city, essentially. And they passed a local bond, and with that they funded on the order of more than 200 mitigation projects, and so that's a good thing, I would argue. And we updated some of our National Weather Service satellites and ways of measuring rainfall data, and updated the flooding models, and to provide new guidance for what area is safe, et cetera, to build. With Hurricane Maria, some of the lessons we took away there was a huge award to Puerto Rico for for the grid. So a long-standing problem before this hurricane with Puerto Rico was the electrical infrastructure that was notoriously poor and constantly going out and didn't work well and wasn't reliable and all that kind of problems. And so in the wake of this, FEMA gave almost $10 billion to redo the grid. I'll just say it's still not great. Interestingly, the people we hired were kind of buds with the people in the administration at the time, or had political connections. So there was a lot of concern as to whether this was really a competitive bid for the best grid, electrical grid operator, manager, et cetera. But it's what happened. This really also helped focus attention on more equity-focused reforms, and particularly around housing, and how do we get people housing, and how does everybody have access to housing, or we never get everybody, but at least get closer to more of the people that need housing. And then a lot better with enhancing how people passed away. And this was driven because the president at the time, who's now our president again, made some non-fact-based statements about how many people died. And so this drove a lot of research into looking at mortality and looking at how folks passed away and all that kind of stuff. Our own wildfires. So we've had many wildfires in the last 20 years, many of which have spawned certain things. But in particular, in the wake of the 2017 firestorms, I should say, what were one or two really important fires that happened in this season? Do you guys remember? Thomas Fire was in that season, yeah. And Paradise. So Paradise, which is now the deadliest fire in California history, at least modern history that we know of. I believe now, because we just found, unfortunately, another body, I believe now the Altadena and Palisades fire, if we could treat them as one event, is now the second most deadliest wildfire in state history. But the campfire that impacted Paradise was really, psychologically and just all that kind of stuff, really traumatizing. And one of the things that really came out of there was the fact that many of those folks were older folks, retired folks, didn't necessarily have cell phones, kind of more rural, more remote. And so the emergency activation system the warnings, didn't get to them, A. B, we specifically didn't tell a lot of the people to evacuate. So of earlier fire in the 90s that had burned the area, when the consultants came in and did the study for the government in the wake of that, they said, yo, these roads effing suck. And if you really try to get all these residents out, they're going to clog the roads and people will not be able to evacuate. If you tell everybody go right now. So the recommendation was to make more exit, more roads. That was expensive, and the city of Paradise wasn't super wealthy, so they said, no, we're not going to do that. We're just going to do phases. So if we have a wildfire, we'll tell you guys to go for 2 hours or something. And then when that's done, then we'll tell you guys to go for 2 hours. And then we'll tell you guys to, which, I guess sounded fine. I guess. I mean, that didn't sound fine to me at the time, but I guess that sort of made sense to somebody. Clearly, when the fire is breathing down on people, they didn't, right? And so all those things sort of came together. And so this is essentially a more robust alerting of folks. And some of you guys mentioned Watch Duty. The Watch Duty app is also another great, in this case, that case, a nonprofit, a free app for your phone, a nonprofit that helps with this. But the other one that I'd say came out of this immediate 2017 was the power safety, the public safety power shutoff things, right? Which is proactively power companies de-energizing lines that they think might be vulnerable to winds and spark and start a fire. And so those are all the things when we get those notices now that grew out of that. And then I would just say that they're still concerned about this. The county of Ventura is concerned that there's not as much transparency around PSs here. And so they're currently talking to Southern California Edison about reforms they'd like to see. So this is an ongoing thing. As we mentioned, the defensible space, the area around structures or developments or whatever, home hardening, we talked a little bit about that. Mutual aid has been bolstered. Mutual aid, again, is when somebody needs help, we just all go and help, particularly with fire and emergency response services, and then we pay them back later, but everybody's just trained in the same mutual aid system. That didn't start in 2017, but it was bolstered. And then more evacuation planning, et cetera. And then, of course, COVID, right? So you guys all can probably talk about some of the stuff that you saw in the wake of COVID. But one success that we definitely need to talk about is Operation Warp Speed. And this was a huge amount of funding to our biotech companies to develop vaccines in a record time. The only reason we could do this in record time is because all of the long-term decades of investment from National Institutes of Health and all this kind of stuff, the exact things that we are now cutting and saying are not important. And the tools that were created from Operation Warp Speed were a fantastic public health success. Instead of taking 2, 3, 4, or 5 years to get vaccines, we got vaccines. We had the first version of the vaccine in 2 weeks, right? I mean, so it took a while to do all the testing and everything before we got in mass production, but the actual vaccine was ready in weeks. That's insane. That was fantastic. That is a success. Unfortunately, some people are now change their tune and now say that this is some kind of was a government conspiracy theory or something like that. But no, it was a success. FEMA helped to manage the national response, particularly with the distribution of vaccines. The vaccinations that we used, that you guys all got, all required refrigeration. We have other vaccines that we gave around to other parts of the world. Some of those did not need refrigeration, but ours all needed refrigeration. So there was a huge logistical supply thing that was coordinated with FEMA. The glass vials, the syringes, all that stuff had to be coordinated, and it was a great success in terms of the logistics of stuff. We also expanded. The first time we used what we had historically used for wars, the Defense Production Act, where the federal government can tell a business what to do. Hey, make more of this, make more PPE, right? Make more syringes, make more masks, or whatever. And we invoked that. And then we established a permanent. I put in permanent because this was up to 2024. We could say this was permanent. The permanent FEMA Office for Health Response. It's no longer permanent, but nevertheless, that was a success. Now, there were many failures too, many problems with our collective response to COVID-19, such as shutting down, keeping little kids out of school for as long as we did and all that kind of stuff. But I'm just trying to highlight some of the things that I think were successes. Okay, cool. Questions? Make sense? So great. So I think we've made some good improvements over the last 20 years. We could always, of course, do better, right? Nothing is ever perfect. We haven't solved these disasters. But with planning, with engagement, with community trust, with honestly listening to each other and honestly looking at ourselves after a disaster and doing realistic, objective diagnostics as to what failed and why it failed, we can do better. And so that's important to say. And all these things we just run through are evidence that that can work, that adults doing adult planning, that have funding, that have the best interests of our community and environment and people at heart, we can make progress.